I loved my husband with all my heart, but when I found out he had been living a double and betraying me for years, I decided to end the marriage and rebuild my happiness from scratch, not dramatic receipts, not lingerie or hotel rooms, grocery receipts, dozens of them stuffed in his gym bag like crumpled secrets, all from a store across town, a store I'd never been to, a store near an address I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I spread them across our kitchen counter. Our kitchen, the one where I'd made him breakfast every morning for 8 years, the one where we'd planned our future over coffee and talked about buying a bigger house for the kids we were trying to have. 304782 for groceries. Another family's worth of food. I knew before I even Googled the address. Deep in my gut, where truth lives before brain catches, I knew. But I Googled it anyway. Watched the street view load. Saw the little blue house with the white picket fence and the swing set in the yard. The swing set broke me. I sat in my car outside that house for 3 hours. Watched a woman who looked like a younger version of me carry groceries inside. Watched 2 kids run out to greet her. A boy who had Marcus's eyes and a girl who had his stubborn chin. They called her mommy. They called him daddy when he pulled in the driveway at 6:47 p.m., just like he did at our house at 8:15 p.m. every weekday. I watched my husband of 8 years hug children I didn't know existed, a woman whose name I would later learn was Sarah. Live at that made our look like the lie. The drive home felt like drowning in slow motion. Every red light gave me time to think of new ways I'd been. Every turn reminded me of somewhere we'd been together, somewhere that was probably scheduled around his other family. Our anniversary dinner last month. He'd been checking his phone all night, said it was work. It was probably her wondering when daddy was coming home. The business trips, the late meetings, the new cologne I'd complimented him on, thinking he was trying to impress me after all these years. God, I'd been grateful. I'd actually been grateful that my husband was making an effort. I walked into our house and everything looked different. The photos on the mantle looked staged. The couch where we'd watched movies looked like a prop. Even the wedding picture above our bed looked like evidence of. I called my sister first. Couldn't even form words. Just sobbed until she said she was coming over. Then I called in sick to work for the next 3 days. Told them it was food. Technically true. I was sick from swallowing 8 years of lies. The internet became my enemy and my best friend. I found their social media. Sarah's Facebook was public, full of family photos going back 5 years. Beach vacations I'd never heard of. Birthday parties where Marcus wore the same smile he gave me. Christmas mornings where those kids opened presents under a tree that looked suspiciously like the one I'd helped him pick out for us. In one photo, she was pregnant. The timestamp said 2 years ago, right around the time we'd been trying to conceive. While I was tracking ovulation and taking vitamins and crying every month when my period came, he was preparing for another baby with someone else. I printed everything. Made a file like I was building a legal case, which I guess I was. Every receipt, every photo, every lie documented and organized. My sister found me at 3 a.m. surrounded by evidence of my destroyed, methodically highlighting dates with a yellow marker. Honey, need to sleep, she said. I need to understand. I replied, not looking. I need to know how I was. The part was easy to calculate. 8 years of marriage, 10 years together total. That second family had been happening for at least 5 years, maybe longer, which meant for half of our relationship, I'd been the other woman without knowing it. I'd been competing with and losing. The hardest part was remembering all the times I'd apologized to him, for working late, for being tired, for not being enough. All those times I'd blamed for the distance I felt between us. It was because there literally was distance. He was somewhere else, being someone else's everything. I thought about confronting him. Planned speeches. Imagine throwing the evidence in his face and watching him scramble for excuses. But what was the point? What could he possibly say that would make this make sense? Instead, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Told her everything. Watched her face change from professional sympathy to genuine shock as the scope of Marcus's deception became clear. This is extensive, she said, flipping through my file. I'm going to recommend a private investigator for custody and financial discovery. We don't have kids, I said automatically, then caught. I mean, I don't have kids. Apparently he does. The lawyer looked at me with something like pity. I'm sorry. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of spousal deception I've encountered. Great. I was the gold standard of betrayed wives. Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in years, made sense. All the little things that had felt off, all the excuses that had seemed reasonable, all the gaps in his schedule that I'd filled with trust instead of questions. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't the problem. I was just married to someone who didn't exist. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Marcus and give him a chance to spin this into something that was somehow my fault. I wasn't going to beg him to choose me over a he'd already chosen years ago. I was going to disappear from his the same way he'd disappeared from mine. Quietly, completely, without explanation. If he could live a double, I could live a single one. The papers would do the talking for me. The private investigator's name was Janet. She looked like someone's aunt and had the organizational skills of a serial. Within 2 weeks, she'd mapped out Marcus's entire shadow existence with terrifying precision. Cool, she said, sliding a folder across her desk. This wasn't a mistake or an accident. This was a calculated double. The photos hit me like physical blows. Marcus at soccer games cheering for kids who weren't mine. Marcus grocery shopping with Sarah, their hands intertwined like newlyweds. Marcus teaching his son to ride a bike in a park I'd never seen. But the financial records were worse. Savings account with Sarah. Insurance policies listing her as beneficiary. A college fund for their children that was larger than our retirement account. He'd been building a future with them while telling me we needed to be financially responsible before starting our family. He owns the house they live in, Janet continued. Purchased it 3 months after wedding. The mortgage payments come from a business account we're not listed on. I stared at a photo of Marcus pushing his daughter on that swing set. She was laughing, head thrown back in pure joy. The same joy I'd been waiting 8 years to give him through children of our own. There's more, Janet said gently. The business trips to Portland. He was actually 40 minutes away attending school events. Wedding anniversary last year. He missed their daughter's birthday party to have dinner with. According to the credit card statements, he bought her a makeup gift the next day, a bike. Cost more than the necklace he gave. I felt something inside my chest, not break. Like glass under pressure, holding together but forever changed. How long? I asked. Best I can determine, he met Sarah about a year into marriage. The first child was born 3 years ago, but there's evidence of the relationship going back 5 years, maybe 6 years. Heard, he'd been building with someone else for most of our marriage. While I'd been planning our future, he'd been living it with them. The hardest part was going home and pretending everything was normal, while I waited for the divorce papers to be finalized. Marcus me goodbye every morning and hello every evening, and I had to stand there and accept it knowing where those lips had been. Who else they'd said, I love, too. I started taking pictures of everything. Our house, our things, evidence that this version of Marcus had existed, even if it had been a performance. My friends began to notice something was wrong. I'd cancelled 3 dinner plans and hadn't returned calls. When my best friend Maya showed unannounced, I broke down and told her everything. I need to promise me something, I said after she'd stopped crying with me. When this comes out, when everyone knows, I need to remember that I loved him. Really loved him. Because I'm about to destroy that person, and I need someone to remember he existed. Maya held me while I sobbed. Honey, we're not destroying anything, or just revealing what was already destroyed. The waiting was, every day felt like performance art. Marcus would tell me about his day, hurt, and I'd wonder which parts were true and which parts were Sarah's day. He'd complain about being tired, and I'd think about him living 2 full lives while I barely managed one. He brought me flowers on a random Thursday. Just because I love, he said, kissing my forehead. I wanted to scream. Instead, I thanked him and put them in water and wondered if Sarah got flowers too, or if I was just the consolation wife who needed extra attention. The breaking point came when he mentioned wanting to try for kids again. We were in bed and he was tracing patterns on my back the way he used to when we were first married. I've been thinking, he said. Maybe it's time. We're stable, the house is paid off, we're not getting younger. The house is paid off because have 2 mortgages. I thought, we're not getting younger but other kids are getting older and need less attention. Really? I managed to say. I want to be a dad, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made me want to. I want us to be a family. As if we were the only us in his. I excused to the bathroom and cried silently into a towel. He already was a dad, he already had a family, he just wanted to expand his collection. That's when I realized the cruelest part of his betrayal. It wasn't just that he'd been unfaithful. It was that he'd stolen my timeline. While I'd been waiting for our to begin, it had already begun without me. While I'd been patient and understanding about his need to be financially stable, he'd been spending our money on another family. He'd stolen years from me. Years I could have spent finding someone who actually wanted that I wanted. Someone who wasn't already living it with someone else. The divorce papers were ready on a Friday. Janet had included everything, the photos, the financial records, the timeline of deception. My lawyer said it was the most thorough documentation of infidelity she'd ever seen. Won't be able to claim any assets, she assured me. Invalidates everything. The house, the savings, even his retirement account. We're entitled to compensation for the money he spent on his other family. I didn't want compensation. I wanted my 8 years back. I wanted the version of who'd believed in love and trust and forever. I wanted to unknow what I knew. But since I couldn't have any of that, I'd settle for freedom. I decided to serve him the papers at his office. Public but not professional, like our marriage had apparently been for him. I walked into the building where he'd worked for 10 years, wearing the dress I'd worn on our first date. The receptionist smiled at me like she always did. Mrs. Chen, how nice to see. Marcus didn't mention we're coming by. Marcus probably didn't mention a lot of things. I found him in his office, on the phone. He smiled when he saw me and held one finger, indicating he'd be done in a minute. I stood in the doorway and watched him wrap a conversation about quarterly projections, and I wondered if Sarah ever got to see him in his element like this. Heard, if she knew about his habit of clicking his pen when he was thinking, or the way he organized his desk calendar with military precision. She probably knew everything about him that I knew, plus things I'd never discovered. She'd had 5 years to learn his secrets while I'd been married to his performance. When he hung, he came around the desk to hug me. This is a nice surprise. What brings by? I handed him the envelope. Divorce papers. I know about Sarah and the kids. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. He looked at the envelope like it might, then back at me. Let me explain, he started. There's nothing to explain, I said. I know everything. I've known for 3 weeks. I just wanted to give the papers in person as a courtesy. He sat down heavily in his chair, opened the envelope, started reading. I watched his face change as he realized how thorough my documentation was. Jesus Christ, he whispered. This is comprehensive, I finished. Yes, it turns out when leave a double trail. He looked at me and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not fear of losing me, fear of being caught. Fear of consequences. I can explain everything, he said again. I'm sure can. I've had years of practice, but I don't need explanations anymore. I need a divorce. I turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. Oh, and Marcus, I'll be out of the house by Sunday. The locks will be changed Monday. If need anything, can contact my lawyer. I walked out of that office building feeling lighter than I had in years. Like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know existed until I set it down. My phone started buzzing before I reached my car. Marcus calling, I turned it off. Let him explain to his coworkers why his wife just served him divorce papers. Let him figure out how to tell Sarah that his other had just imploded. Let him manage the crisis he'd created by trying to have everything. I drove home to start packing 8 years of lies into boxes. The hardest part about starting over at 34 is that everyone expects to bounce back. Or young. My mom kept saying. Have whole ahead of. What she didn't understand was that I'd already planned my whole, and now I had to grieve not just what I'd lost, but what I'd never had in the first place. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. Marcus didn't contest anything, couldn't, really, with the evidence Janet had compiled. He kept his other family and their house. I kept our house, most of the savings, and a settlement that felt like payment for being professionally deceived. The money didn't make me feel better. It made me feel like a who'd just learned her hourly rate. I stayed in our house for exactly 2 weeks after he moved out completely. Walked through rooms that echoed differently without his presence. Slept in a bed that felt enormous and strange. Cooked dinner for one and half of it away. Then I put it on the market and bought a condo downtown. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, no room for the family I'd thought I wanted. No yard for children who would never exist. No guest room for the friends who'd stopped calling after the divorce became public. People had opinions about my marriage ending. Loud opinions. I always thought something was off about Marcus, said my neighbor, as if she'd been sitting on crucial information for 8 years instead of just wanting to feel superior to the wife who got fooled. Or better off without him, said my coworkers, like being betrayed was somehow winning. Everything happens for a reason, said distant relatives, as if Marcus's systematic deception was part of some cosmic plan for my betterment. The worst were the people who wanted details. Who asked probing questions disguised as concern. Who wanted to know how I didn't see the signs, as if my failure to be properly paranoid was the real crime here. I stopped going to places where I might run into people who knew us as a couple. Stopped going to our church, our grocery store, our favorite restaurant. Stopped living in the geography of my old, because every corner held evidence of my spectacular failure to recognize fiction when it was sleeping next to me every night. The therapy helped, sort of. Dr. Martinez was kind and professional, and never once suggested that I should have known better. But she also couldn't give me back the years I'd lost or explain how to trust my own judgment when it had failed so completely. Or grieving multiple losses, she said during one session. The marriage thought had, the future planned, and faith in own perceptions, that's a lot to process. What she didn't say but what I understood was that some losses are permanent. I would never again trust someone completely. I would never again make long-term plans without escape routes. I would never again love someone without keeping a part of in reserve. Marcus tried to contact me exactly once, about 6 months after the divorce. He sent a letter to my office because I'd blocked his number and he didn't know my new address. I never meant for things to happen this way, he wrote. I love both, differently but equally. I know that sounds impossible to believe, but it's true. I'm sorry, God. I'm sorry I couldn't figure out how to be honest without destroying everything. I burned the letter in my sink. Watched 8 years of marriage reduced to ash and thought about how appropriate that was. The hardest part was learning to be a person instead of half of a couple. I'd been with for so long that felt foreign. I had to remember what I liked to eat when I wasn't accommodating someone else's preferences. Had to relearn what I wanted to watch on TV when I wasn't negotiating viewing schedules. I joined a yoga class. Tried online dating. Took a pottery class that I quit after 2 sessions because the clay reminded me of building something from nothing, which felt too much like what I was trying to do with my work. Became my refuge. I into projects with the intensity of someone running from something, which I was. Stayed late, came in early, volunteered for travel assignments. Anything to fill the hours that used to belong to marriage. My boss noticed. Her doing excellent work, Rebecca, but I'm concerned about burnout. I wasn't burning out. I was burning away everything that used to define me until only the essential parts remained. The first time I laughed, really laughed, was 8 months after the divorce. Maya had taken me out for drinks and was telling me about her latest dating disaster, and something about her story struck me as absurd instead of tragic, and I laughed until I cried. There she is, Maya said, smiling. I was wondering when come back, but I hadn't come back. The person I'd been was gone forever. This was someone new, built from the ruins of someone else's lies. I started traveling alone. Went to places Marcus and I had talked about visiting someday. Paris, where I ate croissants for breakfast and didn't apologize for the carbs. Iceland, where I watched the northern lights and didn't he was there to see them with me. Japan, where I stayed in a capsule hotel and felt perfectly sized for my solitary. Each trip taught me something about being alone without being lonely. About making decisions without consultation. About being responsible for my own happiness instead of waiting for someone else to provide it. I also learned about the specific cruelty of social media. Sarah had made her Facebook private after the divorce, but mutual friends would occasionally mention seeing updates. Marcus teaching his son to drive. Their daughter's high school graduation. Family vacations to places I'd never been. They got married 2 years after our divorce was finalized. I found out when his sister, who apparently didn't realize I'd blocked him, tagged me in a congratulatory post by accident. Looking at their wedding photos was like staring into an alternate universe. Marcus in a tuxedo looking exactly as happy as he'd looked at our wedding. Sarah in white, glowing with the confidence of a woman who'd won something I'd never known we were competing for. The children I'd never met looked beautiful and happy. Like a family that had always been a family, not one built on the foundation of someone else's destroyed. I closed my laptop and didn't cry. By then, I'd learned that some pain doesn't deserve tears. Some betrayals are so complete that grief feels too small to contain them. 3 years post-divorce, I finally went on a date with someone new. David was kind and straightforward and told me about his day without me having to wonder which parts were fiction. But when he me goodnight, I felt nothing but the absence of fear, which I'd learned was not the same thing as feeling safe. I told him honestly. But I don't think I'm capable of loving someone the way I deserve to be loved. He was disappointed but understanding. Maybe someday, he said, maybe, but probably not. Probably I was one of those people who loved once, completely and stupidly, and then spent the rest of their protecting themselves from ever being that vulnerable again. I wasn't bitter about this, I was realistic. Marcus hadn't just stolen my marriage, he'd stolen my ability to believe that marriage was possible. He'd taken my faith in forever and replaced it with the knowledge that people are capable of looking in the eye every day for years while living a completely different truth. 5 years later, I had it I liked. A job I was good at. An apartment that felt like home instead of like waiting. Friends who knew me as Rebecca, not as Marcus's ex-wife or the woman who got fooled. I still wore my wedding ring sometimes on my right hand. Not because I missed being married, but because it reminded me of who I'd been when I believed in things like soulmates and happily ever after. That woman had been naive, but she'd also been brave enough to love without reservation. I missed her sometimes. But I didn't miss the marriage that killed her. I didn't miss lying awake wondering why my husband felt distant, not knowing that distant was his natural state when he was living 2 lives simultaneously. People ask me if I ever want to get married again, if I want kids, if I think I'll find love again. I tell them I already found love. It just turned out love wasn't enough to compete with someone else's better offer, more convenient timing, and the thrill of living a secret. I tell them I'm happy now. And I am, in a way that's smaller but more solid than the happiness I used to feel. It's not the explosive joy of believing found person. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing can survive discovering person was never actually yours. Some days I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found those receipts. If I'd lived my whole as the other woman without knowing it. If Marcus would have kept both families forever, dividing his time and attention until we all got old and died never knowing we'd been sharing him. Maybe I would have been happier not knowing. Maybe ignorance really is bliss. But I don't think so. I think the truth was already eating away at me, one unanswered question at a time. I think I would have died married to a stranger, never knowing why I felt so alone in my own. At least now I know why I'm alone. At least now the loneliness belongs to me.